There's something about medieval history that people think they already know. You got castles, different plagues, the dirty streets, and of course, you've got knights. Sure, all of that's true, but what most people don't realize is that the medieval justice system was operating on a completely different plane of imagination. We're not talking about boring old imprisonment here. We're talking about a world where the punishment for gossiping too much was a metal cage locked around your head, where animals were given lawyers, and where a device existed, one that I genuinely cannot believe was real, called the Pear of Anguish, a name that tells you absolutely nothing good is coming. The thing is, none of this was considered extreme at the time. It was the law. It was normal. And once you understand the logic behind it, it somehow gets even more unsettling, because it all made perfect sense to the people living it. So let's talk about it. 9 punishments from medieval Europe that sound completely made up, but weren't. Before we get into the list though, one thing is worth knowing up front, because it's the key to understanding almost everything on it. Medieval Europeans, living under the heavy influence of the Catholic Church, believed that God was not just watching trials, but actively participating in them. Not in some vague spiritual sense, literally stepping in. If you were innocent, God would protect you through whatever test was thrown at you. If you were guilty, He wouldn't. Evidence mattered less than divine outcome. That one belief shaped the entire justice system, and you'll see it woven through nearly every punishment here. There's also the matter of reputation. These were small, tight communities where everyone knew everyone. Your name, your standing, your place in the social order, that was everything. If you lose it publicly, you might as well have lost everything. So a lot of what medieval courts handed out wasn't designed to physically destroy people. It was designed to make them wish they could disappear. Keep both of those things in mind. They start to change how you see all of this, starting with the lightest one on the list. And I use the word lightest very carefully. If you committed some kind of moral offense against the church, your penance might involve nothing more than a white sheet and a Sunday morning. You'd put on the sheet, stand outside the church, and wait while every single person in your community walked past you on their way to service. And while they walked past, you apologized, out loud, by name, if necessary, to each of them. There's something almost comedic about it until you actually picture it. Your neighbors, your friends, people you've known your whole life, staring at you standing there in what is essentially a ghost costume, begging forgiveness in front of the church steps. And in a village where news traveled on foot and memories lasted generations, that moment didn't fade. It became who you were. That's the whole reason it worked. Not everyone got off that easy though. Some criminals were sentenced to wear animal masks, not the fun kind, enormous grotesque ones, while being paraded through the streets or locked in the stocks in the town square. The explicit goal was to make the person look as ridiculous as possible in front of as many people as possible. Medieval justice had a real flair for spectacle. But here's the one in this category that really sticks with me. Some offenders were made to wear crime-specific badges. A badge that told everyone, at a glance, exactly what you had done, and not just for a month or a year, for the rest of your life. If you'd committed perjury, lied under oath, your badge might be 2 large red tongues, bigger than your hand, sewn onto your clothes. Every time you left your house, every conversation, every transaction, every attempt to rebuild any kind of normal life, there they were. You couldn't move to a new town and start over. You couldn't just apologize and move on. The crime was physically attached to you. That was entirely by design. Then there's the ducking stool, which technically falls into the later end of this era, but belongs on any list like this. It was used almost exclusively on women, specifically women accused of being what was called a scold, which meant arguing with their husbands, spreading gossip, or generally refusing to be quiet. The punishment was being strapped into a chair on the end of a long pole and dunked into the nearest lake or river. Multiple times. The number of dunkings was left to whoever was in charge that day, which is its own kind of terrifying. What makes this one land differently is what it was actually punishing, not theft, not violence. A woman who talked back, and the community's official response was to strap her to a pole and throw her in a lake until she reconsidered her choices. The fact that this was written into law, that courts signed off on it, says more about that world than almost anything else on this list. If dunking wasn't enough, the scold's bridle was. Picture an iron cage that locked around the head, with a metal bit that sat inside the mouth, flat in some versions, spiked in others, making speech physically impossible either way. Once it was fitted, the woman wearing it would be led through town for up to 12 hours. On display, it wasn't built to cause permanent injury. It was built to make sure everyone saw. In a world built on reputation, that was the whole punishment. Now, Trials by ordeal. This is where things get genuinely hard to believe because these weren't punishments handed down after a verdict. They were how the verdict was reached. When guilt or innocence was unclear, a court could call for a physical test. God would determine the outcome. There were a few options. The cold water trial. You'd be bound and thrown into a river or pool. If you sank, you were innocent. The water accepted you. If you floated, you were guilty. The water rejected you. Passing the test meant nearly drowning. That was the deal. Hot water. Reach into a pot of boiling water. Pull out a stone. Bandage the hand. If it healed cleanly within 3 days, innocent. If it got infected, guilty. Hot iron worked the same way. Carry a burning piece of iron a set distance and wait 3 days to see what your wound said about your character. And for members of the clergy, there was the trial by host. Take the communion wafer into your mouth and swallow it. Choke. And God just made his opinion known to everyone in the room. What gets me about all of this is that people walked into these tests fully confident they'd pass, not because they were delusional, because they knew they were innocent, and they genuinely believed that God knew it too. The faith wasn't performance, it was real. That's not so different from trusting a system you believe in, even when that system looks terrifying from the outside. Moving on, in the Burgundy region of France, there existed a punishment specifically for women who left their husbands. Not for any crime beyond that, just for leaving. And that punishment was suffocation in mud. It was rare. It didn't happen every week, but it was written down. It was real law. The fact that walking away from a marriage could be treated as a capital offense tells you, without any ambiguity at all, how much freedom women were expected to have, which was none. And now, the animal trials. I need you to stay with me here, because this one sounds like a joke, and it is absolutely not. If an animal committed a crime, a pig that attacked a child, rats that destroyed a grain supply, a horse that kicked someone, that animal could be taken to court, a real court, with a real defense lawyer arguing on its behalf. Proceedings were conducted, testimony was given, and verdicts were handed down. Historians have found documented cases of animals receiving full acquittals. Some cases went to appeal. There's one account that I think about a surprising amount. A hangman decided to skip the whole process. A sow had killed a child, and he executed her on the spot without a trial. No lawyer, no hearing, just immediate execution. The village drove him out, because you cannot just execute a pig without due process. That is not how justice works. The animal deserved its day in court the same as anyone else, and the community's reaction wasn't, "This is obviously absurd." It was genuine outrage that the law had been broken. In their framework, they were completely right. Then there's the gibbet cage. If you were sentenced to death in parts of medieval England or Italy, one available method was being locked in an iron cage, hung in a public square, with nothing. No food, no water, no clothing. You waited, and the waiting could take days. Some prisoners were covered in honey and milk before being placed inside to bring the insects. The body often stayed in the cage long after death, as a landmark, a reminder that sat at the edge of town until there was nothing left to remind anyone of. There's no humor to find in this one. It was designed to be witnessed, and it was designed to linger. On every level, it succeeded. And finally, the pear of anguish. To eat an anguish pear was a real phrase in medieval France. It meant to suffer, to be trapped with no way out. The fact that it became everyday language tells you something about how present this device was in the cultural imagination. The device itself was metal, pear-shaped, inserted into the body, and expanded from the inside using a screw mechanism, opening into thin, sharp blades. Records show it was used during torture sessions, reserved for specific categories of people, those accused of witchcraft, prostitution, homosexuality, and this is the part that's hardest to process, people who weren't displaying enough visible pain during their torture. There was apparently a standard of suffering you were expected to meet, and if you didn't meet it, the bar got raised. A first-hand account from the Spanish Inquisition documents a woman who had the device opened 26 turns. She died shortly after. Her name wasn't recorded. Medieval torture wasn't as common as popular culture makes it seem, or at least, it wasn't commonly documented. But when it happened without any limit on how far it could go. The pear of anguish is the clearest example of what a justice system looks like when there's no floor. So there it is, 9 punishments, 9 windows into a world that operated on completely different rules than ours. And here's the thing, it's easy to look at all of this and just call it barbaric and move on. But that's the least interesting conclusion you could draw. The ordeals weren't sadism. They were sincere theology. The humiliations weren't petty cruelty. They were community management in a world without the infrastructure we take for granted. The animal trials weren't absurdity. They were a real attempt at fairness inside a system that believed every living thing existed within a morally ordered universe, one that God was watching and scoring in real time. None of that makes it okay, but it makes it human. And that's usually where the most honest history lives. Not in pointing at the past and feeling superior to it, but in recognizing the logic, sitting with how reasonable it sounded to the people inside it, and asking what we might be doing right now that future generations will look back on with the same disbelief. That's the question medieval history always leaves me with, and I think it's worth carrying around.